It was a calm October evening in 1993. The kind Nevada was known for. Dry air, pink sky fading into gold. The kind of quiet that made the suburbs around Henderson, just outside Las Vegas, feel untouched by the chaos of the Strip only 20 miles away. At 7:42 p.m., Melissa Turner, a 21-year-old college student, was last seen leaving her part-time job at Desert Hills Pharmacy, a small, family-run shop tucked between a laundromat and a bakery on Warm Springs Road. She waved goodbye to her boss, tossed her purse over her shoulder, and said she was heading straight home. She never made it. Melissa lived with her mother, Janice Turner, in a quiet neighborhood of stucco houses and trimmed hedges. When Melissa didn't come home by midnight, her mother's unease turned to dread. She called the pharmacy, then friends, then the police. By sunrise, patrol cars were canvassing the streets. At first, officers believed Melissa might have gone to meet someone. Her car, a 1988 Honda Civic, but was found the next morning abandoned near Lake Mead Drive, a few miles from her home. The driver's door was unlocked. Her purse was still inside, but her keys were missing. Detective Frank Delgado, a veteran with the Henderson Police Department, took the lead. He'd handled missing persons cases before, but something about this one felt different. Everything about that car looked staged, he later said. Like someone wanted us to find it, but not her. The search began immediately. Helicopters swept over the desert brush near Lake Mead. Volunteers walked the trails, calling her name into the still air. Flyers covered gas stations, diners, and college bulletin boards. Missing, Melissa Ann Turner, age 21. Last seen October 9, 1993. Melissa wasn't the kind of girl who vanished without reason. She was studying nursing at the College of Southern Nevada, working nights to save money for tuition. Friends described her as quiet but kind, the dependable one who stayed sober at parties and made sure everyone got home safe. She loved sketching desert sunsets and had a habit of carrying peppermints in her pockets. A nervous tick, her mother used to say. 2 days into the search, a highway patrol officer reported a possible sighting. A young woman matching Melissa's description seen near a rest stop along Interstate 11, walking alone. But by the time deputies arrived, she was gone. On October 13th, 4 days after her disappearance, hikers in the El Dorado Canyon area found a shoe, a white Reebok, size 7, partly buried in sand. It matched the pair Melissa had been wearing that night. A mile farther down the canyon, searchers found drag marks in the dirt and fragments of fabric. By dusk, the discovery everyone feared came true. Behind a cluster of rock formations, partially hidden by brush, searchers found Melissa's body. The crime scene was grim. She had been assaulted and beaten, her wrists bound with duct tape. The coroner's report later confirmed blunt force trauma to the head as the cause of death. There were signs of a struggle. Sand under her fingernails, bruising on her arms. She'd fought back. Detectives recovered tire impressions near the site, 2 distinct sets possibly from a pickup truck. But there were no witnesses, no cameras, and no nearby homes. The murder of Melissa Turner shook Henderson to its core. Back then it was a small tight-knit city of under 60,000 residents, a place where people still left their doors unlocked. The violence felt alien, impossible. Detective Delgado and his team followed every lead they could. They interviewed co-workers, classmates, ex-boyfriends, even customers from the pharmacy. One name surfaced repeatedly: Tommy Reed, a 27-year-old delivery driver who occasionally brought supplies to the store. Reed had a record: minor theft, bar fights, nothing major. He'd also been seen talking to Melissa several times. Co-workers remembered her looking uncomfortable during one of those interactions. When police questioned him, he admitted knowing her but denied involvement. He had an alibi. He'd been at a friend's apartment watching a UNLV football game that night. The friend confirmed the story, and without evidence tying him to the crime, the investigation stalled. Detectives processed what little physical evidence they had. fingerprints from the car, fibers, and one partial DNA sample recovered from beneath Melissa's fingernails. But in 1993, DNA analysis was in its infancy. Nevada's state lab could only confirm that the sample belonged to a male. It wasn't enough to identify anyone. By early 1994, the case went cold. The Turners held a memorial service in a small chapel overlooking the desert. Janice sat alone in the front pew, clutching her daughter's photo. Melissa in her nursing scrubs smiling shyly at the camera. She just wanted to help people, Janice said to a reporter that day. She didn't deserve to be left out there. Months turned into years. The flyers faded. New houses went up near Lake Mead. The desert reclaimed what it could. Detective Delgado retired in 2005, but he kept one photo of Melissa in his wallet. She was the one case I couldn't close, he told a colleague later. And she never stopped haunting me. For nearly 30 years, the box marked Turner, Melissa, homicide. 1993 gathered dust in the Henderson PD archives, until 2023, when a young forensic analyst named Ava Nguyen pulled the old evidence bag from storage and decided to run the degraded DNA sample through the Combined DNA Index System, CODIS. Updated with millions of new profiles never available back in 93, what came back would send a shockwave through Henderson and through one family that thought its past was buried for good. 3 decades had passed since the desert took Melissa Turner. Time had changed almost everything in Henderson. Casinos stretched closer to the suburbs. New developments replaced dusty trails, and the old Desert Hills pharmacy had long since turned into a vape shop. But inside the Henderson Police Department, a small cold case unit had begun revisiting forgotten files, one at a time. Detective Ava Nguyen, 33, had joined the department after a stint at the Las Vegas Metro Crime Lab. She was part of a new generation of investigators who combined old-fashioned persistence with cutting-edge forensic science. In late 2023, she came across a case file labeled Turner Melissa, 1993. The photos inside stopped her, Melissa's smiling college portrait. The crime scene in El Dorado Canyon, a handwritten evidence log yellowed with age, and in a sealed bag, the fingernail scrapings, still preserved. Most detectives might have moved on to cases with better leads, but something about Melissa's story got to Ava. Maybe it was the victim's age, 21, the same as Ava's younger sister. Or maybe it was the way the file ended, a single sentence scrawled by the original investigator, no closure. DNA insufficient. That winter, Nguyen submitted the old sample for a full reanalysis using modern YSTR DNA profiling, a method capable of extracting information from severely degraded material. It took weeks, but the results finally came through in early 2024. The system produced a partial match to a male relative in the CODIS database, someone convicted of a misdemeanor assault in Utah years later. That partial hit gave analysts a starting point. From there, they turned to genetic genealogy, uploading the sequence to a public genealogy database used by law enforcement under new federal consent guidelines. A name surfaced within weeks, Reed, not Tommy Reed, the man questioned back in 1993, but his younger cousin, Dale Reed, who had lived in the Henderson area during the same period. Dale had been 25 at the time of Melissa's murder, working construction jobs and drifting between Nevada and Arizona. His name had never appeared in the original file. When detectives cross-referenced Dale's old driver's license records, they noticed something that made everyone in the room go silent. He owned a blue Ford pickup truck, registered in 1993, the same make and model linked to the tire impressions found at the crime scene. The pieces began to fall into place. Nguyen and her partner, Detective Luis Ortega, reopened the case officially in March 2024. They tracked down Dale Reed, now 56, living quietly in Kingman, Arizona, under a different name, David Ellis. He worked as a handyman and had a modest criminal record, petty theft, 1 DUI, and a dismissed assault charge from the late 90s. Nothing violent enough to raise suspicion on its own. In April, Henderson PD detectives drove to Kingman to speak with him. They told him they were reviewing an old case from the 90s involving a missing woman. Dale appeared calm, almost too calm. He denied ever knowing Melissa Turner or her family. "Never heard of her," he said, his voice flat. Before leaving, the detectives asked for a voluntary DNA swab. He refused. That refusal, combined with the partial genetic match and the old truck record, was enough to justify a warrant. Within 2 weeks, police collected his discarded coffee cup and cigarette butt from a gas station trash can. The DNA from those items matched the genetic material found under Melissa Turner's fingernails. It was the break they'd been waiting 30 years for. When the lab called Ava with the confirmation, she sat in stunned silence before whispering, "We got him." On the morning of June 12, 2024, Arizona deputies assisted Henderson detectives in arresting Dale Reed at his home. He was taken into custody without incident, though neighbors later described seeing him sitting on his porch as officers approached, like he knew it was over. Back in Henderson, news of the arrest spread like wildfire. Local stations ran the headline, 1993 cold case solved. Henderson police arrest suspect in Melissa Turner murder. For many in the community, it was a shock. The case had faded into near legend, a story older residents whispered about when the desert winds got quiet. Now there was a name, a face, a suspect. Reporters dug through archives, finding that Dale had briefly dated a co-worker of Melissa's in the early 90s. He'd visited the pharmacy a few times. He would have known when she left work alone at night. Detective Ortega told one interviewer, "It was always about timing. Back then we didn't have the science. Today that same strand of DNA, the one we couldn't make sense of in 93, gave her a voice again." When Janice Turner, now in her late 70s, got the call, she broke down in tears. For decades she'd kept her daughter's old room untouched. Same floral wallpaper. Same college textbooks stacked on the nightstand. "I never stopped believing someone would find the truth," she told a Las Vegas reporter. "I just didn't think I'd live to see it." Within weeks of the arrest, prosecutors in Clark County filed charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping and sexual assault against Dale Reed. Under questioning, Reed denied everything. "You've got the wrong guy," he said repeatedly. But detectives noticed cracks in his story, inconsistencies about where he'd been that night, and lies about the type of vehicle he'd owned. The evidence was damning. The DNA beneath Melissa's nails, a 1 in 1.3 trillion match. The tire pattern, consistent with his old pickup. Fibers found on her clothing that matched a jacket brand he'd worn in photos from the time. The district attorney, Michael Grayson, announced in a press conference, "After 30 years, the family of Melissa Turner will finally see justice served." This arrest is the result of decades of perseverance and advances in forensic technology that continue to change how we deliver justice. But even as the case gained momentum, one haunting question lingered in the air. Why now? Why had Dale Reed managed to slip through the cracks for 3 decades? Detectives began piecing together what had happened in those lost years, the life he built under a false name, and the trail of violence that might have gone unnoticed across state lines. That search would lead to one more shocking revelation, something that would connect Melissa's murder to another unsolved case hundreds of miles away. When detectives reopened Melissa Turner's file in 2024, they expected a single arrest, a clean resolution to a 30-year-old mystery. But as they combed through Dale Reed's background, a new pattern began to emerge, one that stretched far beyond Henderson, Nevada. Detective Ava Nguyen sat in the evidence room one evening, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. She was reviewing Reed's employment history when something caught her eye. In 1995, 2 years after Melissa's murder, Dale had worked a construction job in Flagstaff, Arizona. That same year, a 24-year-old waitress named Rachel Diaz had been reported missing after a late-night shift. Her body was found weeks later near an unfinished housing site, strangled just like Melissa. The similarities were too close to ignore. Both women were young, both disappeared after work. Both had traces of struggle but no sign of robbery or theft. And both cases had gone cold. Ava reached out to the Flagstaff Police Department, requesting access to Rachel Diaz's old case file. Within a week, the box arrived. Inside was an evidence bag containing a hair strand found on Rachel's blouse. The label was faded, but the seal was intact. Forensic analysts ran the sample through the same system that had identified Reed's DNA in Melissa's case. 2 days later, the result came back. A partial match consistent with Dale Reed. It wasn't enough to charge him with Rachel's murder yet, but it was enough to prove one thing. Melissa Turner wasn't his only victim. The discovery changed everything. Detectives realized Reed had traveled frequently during the mid-90s, working short-term construction and repair contracts across Nevada, Arizona, and southern Utah. He was the type of man who could drift in and out of small towns unnoticed, using fake names and leaving before anyone really knew who he was. By 1997, Reed had started going by David Ellis full-time, moving to Kingman permanently, and blending into the background of blue-collar life. He wasn't remarkable, not enough to draw attention, not enough to be remembered, and that had kept him safe for 3 decades, but now that anonymity was gone. The media coverage in Nevada brought renewed attention to Reed's past. Former co-workers and neighbors began calling in tips, remembering odd details they hadn't thought mattered. One woman from Bullhead City recalled how he'd shown up to work one morning with scratches on his neck in 1993, claiming he'd been in a bar fight. Another remembered a rusted knife he kept in his truck, one he bragged had seen worse. Detective Nguyen compiled it all. Each detail, no matter how small, painted a clearer picture of a man who'd carried darkness inside him for decades. In the following months, forensic genealogists expanded their testing, reanalyzing old regional evidence for possible links. And while only Melissa's case had a full DNA match, several other disappearances in nearby towns fit the same general pattern. Women walking home alone at night, vanishing without witnesses. It became clear that Reed might have been responsible for more than one tragedy. Back in Kingman, the news shattered the calm life Reed had built. Neighbors who once exchanged waves stopped speaking to his family. One neighbor told reporters, he was quiet, polite even. You'd never think he could hurt someone. But looking back, there was something in his eyes, something cold. Reed's family kept silent, avoiding cameras. His ex-wife, who'd divorced him in 2003, gave a single statement to police. She described years of verbal abuse, occasional violence, and strange late-night drives where he'd disappear for hours. He'd come home smelling like gasoline and dirt, she said, her voice breaking. When I asked where he went, he'd just stare at me. For the first time, investigators saw the full outline of a predator who had hidden in plain sight for years. As the Clark County District Attorney's Office prepared for trial, they built their case around the DNA evidence, the vehicle match, and the timeline connecting Reed to Melissa Turner's final night. The defense tried to argue contamination, claiming the sample was too old to be reliable. But the prosecution's experts dismantled those claims with forensic precision, explaining the chain of custody and how advanced testing confirmed the match beyond any reasonable doubt. In October 2024, prosecutors filed a motion to introduce pattern evidence, testimony about Reed's behavior, and other possible linked cases. It was a risky move but crucial to show intent. The judge allowed limited testimony from the Flagstaff case, ruling that the similarities were too striking to ignore. Meanwhile, the Turners prepared themselves for court. Janice Turner, frail but determined, told a reporter, "I want to see his face when they say her name in that courtroom." The trial date was set for March 2025. In the months leading up to it, the quiet Nevada suburb that once buried Melissa's memory began to remember her vividly. The University of Nevada, Las Vegas, held a candlelight vigil in her honor, organized by alumni who'd studied with her. Her old co-workers, some now retired, came forward with their stories. One said, "She was the kind of person who lit up a room. When she vanished, it dimmed this whole town." Detective Nguyen attended that vigil, standing at the edge of the crowd. She'd never met Melissa, but she felt like she knew her now. Every smile in the photos, every word in her mother's letters. As the candles flickered in the desert wind, Nguyen whispered quietly to herself, "You're finally being heard." But as the trial approached, there was one more twist waiting. A discovery in Reed's old storage unit that would shift the case from proof to absolute certainty and reveal what really happened the night Melissa Turner disappeared in 1993. Winter came early to Nevada in 2025, bringing with it the kind of chill that settled into the bones. Inside the Clark County Courthouse, however, the air was thick with tension rather than cold. After 32 years of silence, the case of State of Nevada versus Dale Reed was about to begin. Detective Ava Nguyen took her seat near the front, her badge tucked beneath her jacket. Across the aisle sat Janice Turner, now 78, flanked by her son Michael. They'd both waited a lifetime for this day. When the doors opened, a hush fell over the courtroom. Dale Reed walked in wearing a plain gray suit, his hands trembling slightly as he took his seat beside his attorney. He looked older than his years, his face lined, eyes sunken, his once dark hair now white. Yet behind the exhaustion, there was still that same cold, detached stare the detectives had seen during his arrest. Prosecutor Michael Grayson rose first, his voice steady. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a story of justice delayed, but not denied. 30 years ago, a young woman named Melissa Turner was taken from this world. She fought for her life that night, and in doing so, she left behind the evidence that now speaks for her." He described the DNA under her fingernails, the tire tracks in the canyon dust, the fibers, the new analysis, each piece fitting together like a puzzle that had taken 3 decades to complete. He pointed toward the defendant. "The man who sat in silence for 30 years believing he'd gotten away with it is sitting right there." When the defense attorney stood, he went on the attack immediately. The state's case relies on old, degraded evidence and memories that have faded with time. There are no eyewitnesses, no confession, and no definitive proof that Mr. Reed had anything to do with Melissa Turner's death. But Grayson's witnesses were methodical. The forensic analyst testified about how even trace DNA can survive decades if properly stored. The genealogists explained the family tree that had led them to Reed. Then came the emotional testimony, Janice Turner, her voice shaking but steady, describing the phone call that changed her life in 1993. When asked what justice would mean to her now, she said simply, "It means peace. It means I can finally say goodbye knowing the truth." The defense tried to poke holes in the science. They questioned the chain of custody, suggesting contamination over the years. But the prosecution's next move silenced the room. They introduced newly discovered evidence from a storage unit once rented by Reed under his alias. Detectives had found it just 2 weeks before trial. The unit was dusty, filled with old tools, paint cans, and boxes of junk. But at the bottom of one container was something different. A small lockbox wrapped in a plastic bag. Inside were several items, a broken wristwatch, a silver necklace, and a folded photograph of Melissa Turner. The watch was engraved on the back, "MT Love." Mom Janice gasped audibly when it was shown in court. That watch had been a 21st birthday gift to Melissa, never recovered from the crime scene. Even Reed's attorney paused. He whispered something to his client, but Reed said nothing. His jaw clenched tight. When Detective Nguyen took the stand, she described finding the box. "It was the last thing we expected," she said softly. "But once I saw that photo, I knew this wasn't just a random crime." He kept a piece of her. The prosecution rested their case the following day, confident that the evidence, both scientific and physical, was overwhelming. Reed chose to testify. His lawyer had warned him against it, but he insisted. He sat before the jury and claimed, "I found that stuff years after she went missing. I didn't kill her. Somebody must have dumped it out there." But when asked how her photograph ended up in his possession, he had no answer. His voice cracked, and for the first time, his hands shook uncontrollably. The courtroom watched in silence. During closing arguments, Grayson's voice broke slightly as he said, "Melissa Turner did not die in vain. She fought, and because she fought, she left us the truth, and that truth points to only one man." The jury deliberated for 8 hours. At 6:45 p.m. on April 8, 2025, they returned with a verdict. The judge asked the foreperson to rise. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Dale Reed, guilty of murder in the first degree." The words hung in the air. Janice Turner closed her eyes and exhaled, the sound of decades of grief finally finding release. Detective Nguyen lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Reed stared blankly at the table, his lips moving but no words coming out. When deputies cuffed him, he didn't resist. Outside the courthouse, the Nevada sunset painted the desert gold. Reporters gathered as Janice, supported by her son, addressed the cameras. "For 30 years, my daughter's voice was silent. Today she spoke again, and justice finally answered." In the days that followed, local newspapers ran headlines like, "Decades of silence broken, Melissa Turner's killer convicted, and DNA delivers justice for Henderson family. Reed was sentenced to life in prison without parole." For Detective Nguyen, it was the case that defined her career. She joined the force to give forgotten victims a voice, and now she'd done exactly that. But there was something about Melissa's story that stayed with her long after the verdict. The way the town had rallied. The way science and persistence had brought truth from the dust. Months later, she visited El Dorado Canyon one last time. The sun was low, turning the sand a deep red. She placed a single white flower near the spot where Melissa's body had been found. "It's over now," she whispered. "You can rest." In the distance, the desert wind stirred, soft, like a sigh through the rocks, and for the first time in 30 years, Henderson, Nevada, felt quiet again. The summer of 2025 in Henderson was quieter than anyone remembered. For the first time in decades, there were no whispers about the girl from the canyon. The story that had haunted this desert suburb for over 30 years had finally found its ending, but endings in real life rarely come clean. They ripple through families, towns, and even strangers who never met the victim but somehow felt her loss. In the weeks after Dale Reed's conviction, Henderson police received a wave of letters from retired officers, local residents, even people from other states who'd followed the case. Many thanked Detective Ava Nguyen by name. One note read, "Thank you for proving that time doesn't bury truth, only patience uncovers it." The department held a small ceremony in July to honor the cold case team. In the briefing room, with framed photos of old unsolved cases lining the walls, Chief Darnell presented Nguyen with a plaque that read, "For persistence in pursuit of justice, Melissa Turner, 1972-1993. Nguyen didn't say much, just nodded, thanked her colleagues, and sat quietly for a moment afterward, staring at the photo of Melissa they'd placed on the table. "She was just my age when it happened," she murmured. "We should have found her sooner." That sense of guilt, the kind that every cold case detective learns to live with, stayed in her eyes. But so did something else.